Welcome back. I'm really happy to see that many of you have liked my videos. I have seen some interesting comments. I try to reply to most of them, and really gratifying to see that I'm able to share my ideas with you, and some of you are able to relate to it. So today I want to talk about what is the hot topic in India, that is the latest scams that have been unearthed, the proceedings against Chidambaram, and the proceedings against Sharad Pawar. So that reminds me of the old days. Before leaving India, I worked in India for 13 years, and out of that 13, 3 years were as an undergraduate in a nationalized bank. And I remember from those days, like, these scams have been going on for a very long time. It's just that none of the successive governments had the will, political will, courage, or any motivation to bring it under control. And all the people who are committing these scams, they were changing parties based on their convenience in order to protect themselves, stay in power so that their misdeeds cannot be exposed, and thus avoid prosecution and any consequences. And those politicians have become so rich that they own colleges, they own businesses, they own properties abroad, and probably many of them have Swiss bank accounts that an average Indian won't have. So, having said that, I'll just give you a snapshot into what was happening earlier. Like, this is around the mid 80s. That's when I was working in a bank in India, and I was quite young. I was still doing my BCom, so I was still learning things. I was observing things happening around me, and at that time India was very different. So the nationalized bank job used to be something that you had to do a competitive exam and give some interviews, and then after the national selection you get into it. So of course there was corruption in that also. So that apart, I already got into the bank. I started working there. I was working in the cash counter, then I was working in the current accounts, and so on. So it's a rotation. So at that time I remember very well that we used to have a minister called Janardhan Pujari, and he had introduced something called as a loan mela. The loan mela is basically a populist measure where they said that the poor people need to get money in order to better their lives. So we are going to give them loans, and it's going to be a very easy verification loan. They don't have to do much. Even if they put their fingerprints, that is sufficient. So in those days what used to happen was builders used to bring all their migratory laborers, and each one of them would get 5,000 rupees, put a stamp on the document, and go away. This was one way of the scam. So that money would be out of the banking system, and then there is no way of collecting it because these laborers would have gone somewhere else. And so that was one way of scamming. It's in a lower level, and at least it benefited a little bit to the migratory workers, because most of the money used to go to the builder, because these guys didn't know what they were signing for, where they were putting the thumb impressions, and what was the consequences. So later on the bank would go and try to recover the money, and they can't find these laborers, so the money was gone. So that became an NPA, which would subsequently be written off. And when they write off an NPA and recapitalize the bank, what is happening is they are taking the taxpayer money and putting it back into the banks. So this was one track. The other track is much more serious. The other track is one where many bank managers were afraid to sit in their cabin. They were afraid to be in office. They always wanted to be touring around, going to visit client place and so on. And one of the main reasons for that was that they would get a call from a politician. In those days we didn't have cell phones. It was all landlines. And they would get a call from a politician, and he would say, I'm sending so and so, you have to give him a loan. And this will always be on a phone call, never in writing. But if you defy those orders, then you would be transferred to some backwater somewhere, into a village where there is probably a small police station and a dilapidated bus stop, and your life will be miserable for the next 3 or 4 years. So the bank managers didn't want to receive those calls. And it was almost certain that a loan given like that will never be paid. It will become bad debt. And if that loan becomes a bad debt, the bank manager has to answer at certain level. he cannot escape the responsibility entirely, and he can't depend on the politicians to stay in power and help him out. So typically, the honest, tax-paying, God-fearing branch managers would try to avoid being in the office so that they don't receive those calls. However, despite all that, they used to succeed the politicians used to succeed to get loans for their cronies and relatives. And these loans are not small, like 5,000 or 10,000. These are multi-crore loans, and they are typically put up for setting up a factory, and there will be a project report which shows how it's going to be profitable and so on. And after the loan is given, when you go to collect the loan 5 years down the line, the loan turns delinquent. They don't pay, and there is political pressure that you cannot follow up very aggressively, and there are consequences for the people who follow up. So there was a special position created in the bank in those days. It was called as Assistant Manager Industrial Development, AMID. So this assistant manager used to report to the branch manager. So they used to share this problem of trying to avoid giving bad loans, and then having to go and collect an uncollectible loan with a lot of political pressures. So these kind of pressures would come all the way right from the chairman and managing director and percolate down to the branch level. So it was very difficult to avoid all those kind of, you can dodge a few of those requests, but in the end of your career, you're going to have to do a couple of those kind of loans. And all these things accumulate and become an NPA in the bank balance sheet. And always people would say, nationalized banks, they don't run properly, and they have non-performing assets, they really don't care. So the real story is that because nationalized banks are owned by the government, and there is no single person who is looking at it from a profitability perspective. Like all these nationalized banks were done were created in order to generate employment. So it was an employment generating vehicle for the government. The emphasis was never on making profit. And this whole idealistic vision was perverted by the politicians to make money. And this is the genesis of a scam, of a bank scam. So what you do is you tell the bank manager that my nephew is going to come, and he's got a factory, he's putting up a factory, and it's going to create a lot of accessories that are used on the highways, and it has got great demand. There's a captive order available, and it's a success story. He needs money to get started, please do that. And then you give the money, and then 5 or 6 years down the line, when the payment has to come in, and you start following up, the company has gone bankrupt, and they can't pay. And then you say, we are going to possess your assets. So you put the assets under lock and key, but when you go there to take possession, first of all, it's going to be difficult to put your lock and key on it. They would create a lot of problems. But once you go and put your lock and key, you're basically securing a premises which has got nothing worth value in it. And then the banks would find out that the same premises has been given as surety for multiple such loans. Then the banks would go to the court, and they would be fighting among themselves and with the creditor to get their proceeds back. So these are the kind of things that used to happen, and it's not visible to the common man. Unless you're in the banking system and you've worked in the banks, you wouldn't know that this is what happens. So as a result, now what is happening is this new government is trying to clean up everything. So they are reducing the number of banks by consolidating them, so that there is less outlets for corruption and these kind of activities. And the recent prosecution of Sharad Pawar and Chidambaram and all these things, they are very, very positive moves. We have to wait and see how many of them will actually get punishment, and how many of them will lose the ill-gotten wealth and it will come back to the government. Because the next standard play for all these people is going to be that as before they are arrested and all that, you can see them in their nice cars going here and there, giving big speeches and all the stuff, and you can see them in big functions. But the moment they are arrested, or there's a case against them, immediately they hold on to their heart, and then there's a doctor who's going to certify that, yeah, they have to be in the hospital. because they are frail and they can't be put into the jail. Now, all those shenanigans will start. So we have to wait and watch how it unfolds and how much this government can actually go through and bring these guys to the book. However, it's a very good start right now, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So I'd like to hear from you, your own experiences of, some of you might have already been in the banks, or some of you might have experienced this because one of your relatives was a branch manager in a nationalized bank or something like that. Write to me in the comment, and I'll be bringing up a second segment on this, and I would like to use those anecdotes so that people can know how these scams are generated. So thank you for watching, and please like, subscribe, and forward this video to your other friends so that the message can reach further. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye.